And we were just talking about having been at the police car during the free speech movement. So I remember seeing you there. You had a blue shirt on, didn't you, Gar? Okay, so Gar is going to be able to lead off in a minute, but let me tell you about our other participants. Joanna Santa Barbara. Joe, will you wave, please? Joanna is in New Zealand. She's a dear friend of mine from way back. She was a physician and very active in the Physicians for Global Survival movement here in Canada. Was a child psychiatrist and was very involved in setting up the Peace and Conflict program at McMaster University until she moved to New Zealand 10 years ago. And we have Emily Gilbert, who is actually closest to me, I guess, in that both of us are sometimes in the same building at University College at the University of Toronto. Emily is a professor of geography and of Canadian studies. She manages a program in Canadian studies and is involved with journals dealing with military matters. As I was kind of laughing, this is those three things do not normally go together very well, but at any rate, that's her bag. And she has her own point of view about the connection between global warming and militarism. And you will also be seeing Cesar Jaramillo, who is with us visually, at least we can see him. And we can't see the other guy, Earl Turcott, who seems to be invisible, and I hope will be able to speak to us by phone, although so far we haven't got very big success on that. But Cesar Jaramillo is the director, is that your title, of Project Ploughshares? Or do you have a different title these days, sir?
Sorry, I was muted. Yes, that is the title. Executive Director of Project Ploughshares is the official title, Metta.
Yes, Project Ploughshares is, I would call it a good think tank. Would you call it a benign think tank having to do with peace and development, mostly peace issues? Maybe you don't like that title, good think tank, but it's in Waterloo, and there are a number of scholars doing research there on very important matters. So I hope that Earl will be able to chime in, even if he can't be seen. Now, our topic for our conversation will be that we want to examine the connection, if any, I suppose to leave it open, is a connection between militarism and climate change. And I must say that when I use the word militarism, I have to be careful whom I'm speaking to, because are military people and peace activists. And they tend to take exception or want to make me clarify what I mean by the word militarism. I'm not going to go into that. I don't like to waste time with defining terms, but I would say that it has either a very favorable connotation to members of the military who believe that they are in fact defending human beings and protecting us, and that they should be honored for doing that. And that in fact, insofar as there are problems about the world's climate changing, it's going to be a problem that is one that affects them too, and they suffer from maybe as much as anybody else. So I have a letter here I'd like to read, which I got today from one of my friends who I'll read the whole thing. He says, this is Michael Marion, who is a scholar in Lafayette, New York. He said, I'm intrigued by the topic of militarism and climate change, which to my knowledge has received little treatment. So I went to Google, and the lead item is Militarism and Climate Change, the Elephant in the Living Room, from studentenergy.org. It mentions pollution, impacts of active combat, land use, weapons development and production, and diversion of resources, that is, opportunity costs. Scrolling down on Google, there were many other articles attacking militarism as an ideology that builds strong militaries for security and often ignores climate matters so as to promote defense industries that deepen our problems. However, change the first word on Google to militaries and climate change. It was militarism. Now change it to looking up militaries and climate change, and you get a very different set of references, including climate change. Weather already threatens 50% of U.S. military sites from USA Today. Also, a thoughtful piece for foreign policy. The only force that can beat climate change is the U.S. Army. It says, am I conflicted? No, I favor both arguments. So I think that's bearing in mind that point of view, that it's possible to see that climate change is going to be a heavy responsibility and a burden for militaries around the world, and that may be true in part. We also have to look at the critical facts about whether or not military structures and armies and battleships and so on actually do contribute to global warming. And for that, I wonder if Gar, you there in Berkeley, if you have some thoughts about this and can give us what you consider the real scoop on the connection.
Well, I'd like to observe broadly that everybody on the planet today is at danger from two major existential threats. One is nuclear war and the other is climate change. What connects them is that the military is largely responsible for both. It's understood that the military has built bombs, but it's not quite clear yet to most people that the military is such a vastly polluting organization that it's actually largely responsible for some of the greenhouse gases that are changing the climate. It's kind of ironic because military history has long practiced the tactic of scorched earth, which is destroying resources to conquer a target population. This goes all the way back to the Holy Bible, discovered in the book of Judges. It reports that Samson used the scorched earth tactic against the Philistines by capturing 300 foxes, tying them together tail to tail, attaching torches, and stampeding them into the green fields of the Philistines. As far as I know, that's the earliest.
Are you oxen? Gar, are you saying oxen?
Foxes.
Boxes.
Yeah, little foxes. He used foxes.
Little foxes.
The Philistines.
They set them on fire and tried to burn up the crops.
To set fire to their crops, right. Samson didn't have access to helicopters, so he had to use foxes. More recently, we've got George Washington during the Revolutionary War. He used scorched earth tactics against the Native Americans, and we all know that in his march through Georgia, General Sherman set fire to something like 10 million acres of crops. Something that surprised me, well, to bring it up a little more currently, in the war in Asia, in Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos, the U.S. made a practice of destroying forests and crops through the use of napalm and herbicides. Something that's not commonly recognized is that when you incinerate a forest, when you set fire to large forests or kill them slowly through chemicals, they release their stored carbon back into the environment. So when you destroy a forest, you increase the CO2 content of the ambient air and elevate global warming. Something I came across recently really surprised me. I was looking at one of these maps of global temperature change over the last couple of centuries, and I noticed what may just be a coincidence. But I'd like to share it with the audience, and I think this deserves further investigation. Now, this will probably appear backwards on the screen, but I'm going to try it anyway. This is 2 centuries of global climate change. Oh, I see it. Let's see. Yeah. Okay.
Just pull it up a little. Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
I've illustrated the high points, and there's a coincidence between elevated global temperatures and warfare. Civil War, World War I, Korean War, and you'll notice that there's a great congregation of peaks over the last 20 years. The head of the UN recently pointed out that wars today are getting longer than they used to be. They're lasting 20 years. They become intractable long-term struggles instead of short-term efforts. And I think we may see that reflected in the graph, where after the announcement of the global war on terror, there appears to be a global environmental peaking of greenhouse gases. Now, we do know that war causes pollution. The Pentagon runs on oil, 1 million barrels a day. The weapons of war are very fuel inefficient. A B-52 bomber goes through 47,000 gallons of aviation fuel in a single mission. And of course, the amount of oil that's burned and the amount of emissions that are created expand every time there's a war. The elephant in the room, as people have said, is the military's contribution to global warming. It is a major factor. It's been estimated. Nobody knows for sure because the Pentagon has this exemption from reporting on its consumption and its pollution. This started during the Rio climate conference when the U.S. got a special waiver to exempt the Pentagon from reporting this pollution.
That's in the the Kyoto Accord that exempted them, right?
Right, the Kyoto Accord.
So no country has to report its military emissions.
Right, it's completely voluntary. Right? They can decide how or whether or not to report their consumption or their pollution. So the estimates that we have are that the U.S. military may be responsible for as much as 5% of climate greenhouse gases. Add in the other militaries of the world, and you have maybe 15% of climate change driven by military activity. But that's only the military. It doesn't include the parallel operations required to manufacture weapons, to secure the fuel, to get the fuel to the battlefields, to protect the super tankers and the ground tankers that get the fuel to the fighting machines. And according to one survey that I saw from 2010, some researchers determined that during the during the Persian Gulf War, the war itself released 43.3 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. But the cost of getting the fuel to fuel that war itself required the emission of another 34.4 million metric tons of CO2 over the course of a year to deliver the fuel. And then on top of that is the cost of the ships that have to shadow the super tankers, the fuel vessels, and all of the other fuel delivery pipelines and infrastructure to make sure that the oil is secured. That runs an estimated $100 billion a year to the American taxpayer. And the Pentagon admits to what's going on. It's in the words of General Abizad, the former CENTCOM commander during the 2003 Iraq War. He was quite open about it. He said, of course it's about oil. We can't really deny that. So we've got a situation where we fight wars to secure our access to oil so that we can fight wars for the access to oil. It's an absolute conundrum. We're in this cycle that is not going to end until we either end war or the oil runs out. And I prefer the first alternative.
All right. I think we can all heartily approve of your preferences. By the way, I had a conversation, or an interview with another man about Christmas time, Larry Brilliant, who is an epidemiologist who was really in charge of the campaign that toward the end that eliminated smallpox. And my interview with him, he mentioned something that startled me. He said that of the expenses that the U.S. Incurs in sending any kind of operation overseas to fight, as in Afghanistan, that 40% of the cost of that war, that operation, goes for the transportation of fuel. That, of course, you have food that has to be moved in, and you have weapons that have to be moved in, and so on. But those are light in comparison to the amount of fuel that's to be transported to the battlefield and to wherever they're doing the operation. So that 40% of the cost is simply the transportation of the fuel for the operation itself that they're going to be using there. I thought it was amazing. And also, you mentioned the fact that we don't get enough access to data. We can't really calculate. I know Paul Hawkins's wonderful book, Drawdown. I heard an interview with somebody with him saying, was there anything that you think would be an important contribution to ending global warming that you couldn't include in this book as a type of intervention? And he said, yes, war. He said, I'm sure that the emissions from war and weapons and standing armies has to account for a large part of the CO2 in our environment that's causing global warming. But because the data are not available, we couldn't do the calculations, and therefore I had to skip it. Couldn't include it in the list of measures that should be taken. So I think if we can get really good hard data about what the actual effects are of war for the environment, especially for global warming, that will make it easier for us to have some sort of campaign to make some changes, right? Anyway, thank you for that. And I'd like now for Emily to give your own understanding of this dispute that I alluded to earlier about the difference of opinion about whether or not the military is protecting us and is responsible for defending us from global warming or not. Is it a source of emissions?
Right. Thanks, Metta. Thanks. So just to follow on what's just been said by Gar Smith, I mean, it's clear that the military is a huge contributor to climate change, and that if the military is going to take up these issues, that's probably a good thing, and starting to address some of the impacts of climate change. But what I've been really worried about, and this is going back 5-6 years in particular, is how much militaries have become advocates for dealing with climate change issues. And in particular, how many resources are being directed through militaries for dealing with these issues. So as we've already heard, militaries are hugely responsible for CO2 emissions, for pollution, and a lot of it is fueling those forward bases with fuel and other provisions. And one of the reasons militaries are concerned about this is because that creates great vulnerabilities for them. So the supply chains that need to provide the forward operating bases are some of the most vulnerable situations that we face as international forces in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so one of the reasons militaries are taking up these issues is because they're worried for their own soldiers and their own sustainability. So that's all good. Except what's happening now is that militaries are some of the biggest advocates for dealing with climate change. And this is particularly the case in the United States, where we have a president who denies climate change, whereas some of his military are the biggest advocates for trying to address climate change. And where that's a problem is that it has encouraged all kinds of resources to go to the military for technological development and for trying to deal with these issues. And so what we have is the military leading the pack in terms of the kinds of responses that we're going to see develop to climate change. So for example, we have huge solar bases that are being set up on military stations in the United States. And again, that's all fine, except that it's a particular kind of arrangement that you can put into place because of the land that the military has access to in the United States. And the ways that they're linking up with the private sector in those sites is particularly troubling because of the ways that they are also being brought into these arrangements, so that it really is a military-private sector partnership that's developing. And when it comes to the technological developments, it's also concerning because what happens is the kinds of technologies that the military is innovating are ones that are of interest to them and their future sustainability, and not the sustainability of cities, of people in other parts of the country. So to give one example, we see the ways that innovating around sustainable vehicles, whether they're naval fleets or planes or vehicles, can have an impact. But there's certainly no money that's going into thinking about public transport or subways, because that's not of the military's interest. So the kind of design that they are building is very much a military kind of design, which is hierarchical, individualistic, authoritarian, and doesn't lend itself well to thinking about a more social commons that we need as we're trying to address these kinds of issues. And I think that's one of my big frustrations with militaries taking up these issues, is that it encourages a very nationalist approach to issues that we know need global cooperation around. And so militaries are notorious for thinking about national defense, for thinking about themselves, and not thinking about how they're going to collaborate and even compromise with other organizations or other nation states. And so if we have militaries driving the future of these discussions, and they have become much bigger players around the world, they are at the UN meetings, they are developing policies within their own nation states. I think we really are building a kind of model for dealing with these issues around climate change that is hugely problematic. And in fact, I first came across these issues when I was living in Australia for a year, and they were redesigning their national defense. And their main concern at the time was the impact climate change was going to have on migration from the South Pacific Islands into Australia. And so their concern about national defense was stopping migrants from arriving on their shores and, in their words, flooding Australia with non-white populations. And so it's that kind of mentality that I think is so problematic when you have a military that's at the core of dealing with these kinds of issues. And then just the last thing I would say is that we have no evidence that the military thinks of nature as something other than an externality that is to be mastered and conquered. I mean, that is in the nature of a military, is to go in and seek out resources and to use them to their own national interests. And with that kind of model of thinking about our relationship to the land, to the air, to the sea, there is no future for thinking about climate change as a way of thinking about us holistically within the world. And so I'm really worried about the ways that military are taking up these issues, even though I absolutely agree, if we have militaries, they should be more sustainable. But designing a lead-free bullet that's not going to have environmental impact in the soil is neither changing our attitude towards killing, nor actually dealing with the long-term structural impacts of climate change.
Absolutely, very interesting. Yeah, in reading a paper today, I was struck by the image that you conveyed, that the militaristic way of thinking about national defense is that you're protecting your country from external threats. And therefore, if you conceive of, you're trying to defend, the internal domestic problem isn't your issue. You're not trying to solve how we are causing global warming. Seeing it as a threat to us from somebody outside, and we have to be on guard and defend ourselves against these bad things that are coming at our nation.
That's right. In Australia, it was particularly evident because they saw the South Pacific Islands as a threat, even though in terms of climate change and production of CO2, they are not the threat. They are the ones who are the victims to the threat that's being created by the Western world. And yet, in the military's view, they are the threat because they are going to have to leave their islands because they're being flooded and move to Australia and perhaps also to New Zealand.
Mm-hmm. I think Australia's already got a pretty bad record of keeping their potential immigrants offshore in an island someplace, wasn't it?
Yeah, islands in different countries. Yeah. Maybe,
Joe, do you know anything about what the Australians have been doing about that? Joe is Australian by birth. Joanna. No, you're muted, Joe. You can't hear you. Unmute yourself.
Okay. Yeah, right. I do know, and I'm practically too ashamed to speak of it, what Australia is doing to refugees detained on Nauru and Manus Island is absolutely shocking. And I won't digress from our mainstream argument to speak about it. As Emily says, it exemplifies Australia's attitude to certain problems, to externalize the enemy. Again, this is a bit of a digression, but I think it's worth saying that New Zealand foresees the same problem of South Pacific migration and has an attitude that I think is prevalent and is in the current government of preparing for it, preparing to settle climate refugees from the South Pacific. But we have some responsibility to take care of islanders who can no longer live on their homeland. I would go further and want to talk about preserving the cultures of these islands, which are unique and will become extinct if we don't preserve their unique cultures when they have to change where they live. However, I don't want to take us off track too much, and I don't know whether Emily's completed what she's saying.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Emily, do you have anything to say about that further?
No, I'll join in later, but let's get other people to say something.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think I don't know whether we can reach the point of saying already that that the challenge is to reduce military spending and military institutions, the establishment of military bases around the world, and the building of, oh my goodness, probably Cesar can even tell us a little bit about the possible effects of these fighter planes, because I just was reading someplace today that you know, the U.S. is building these extraordinarily expensive new fighter planes, F-35s, is that what they're called? And of course, Canada has vacillated about whether we want to buy them or not because they're amazingly expensive. But the cost in terms of the emissions that they will create, the amount of waste, CO2 production in manufacturing, and then of course in using these things, is really extraordinary. What can you tell us about the current status of that, if anything, Cesar? Do you know anything about those F-35 planes?
Hi, Metta. Yeah, I was just unmuting my feed there. Yes, I mean, I'm not that familiar with the specific sort of environmental impact of the F-35s. The reason that is controversial, you know, from my perspective, is different. I mean, I just don't feel it's the right type of plane that Canada needs for the type of missions that the Canadian Armed Forces would likely engage in. So it's another type of concern. I will take the opportunity to have that I have the floor, virtually speaking, to make a few points about the environment, with the obvious caveat that the environment is not my area of expertise. I mean, at Project Ploughshares, it's a more arms control and disarmament rather than the environment. But I will say a couple of things that I think you folks might find relevant. The first has to do with the nuclear ban treaty and more broadly the nuclear abolition enterprise, and the impact, the positive impact, I might add, that an emphasis on the environmental consequences of any nuclear weapons exchange has had for the whole policy debate, for the whole multilateral process that has led to the abolition of nuclear weapons. There has, if you look at the ban treaty itself, at the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, there's, I don't know how many, but there's several references to the environment, to the environment itself, to the effects of nuclear war, etc. And of course, there is a reason for this. There is a well-documented, sort of pattern of environmental impact from nuclear testing, from nuclear both by various nuclear armed states, and the victims and the descendants of the victims are still quite active in the nuclear abolition movement. I think those both historical effects of the environmental impact of nuclear weapons use and testing, coupled with literature about the eventual environmental impact of a larger nuclear weapons exchange, and very thorough scientific studies about nuclear winter and about, you know, the many ways in which the ecosystem and the environment would be affected by a nuclear war, have served, I think, to galvanize support around the idea of a nuclear weapons prohibition. I mean, there's of course humanitarian concerns, and those about the environment are in addition to the humanitarian concerns. But I would emphasize that those about the environment have been and continue to be quite relevant in the nuclear abolition realm. So that's just one example, and I'm happy to elaborate if needed. But the other point I want to talk about is the broader framework of what is now known as humanitarian disarmament, and humanitarian disarmament, which is more or less at the intersection of IHL, of international humanitarian law, and of international, sort of traditional international human rights law. And there you have humanitarian disarmament, which is still a relatively recent movement, and civil society, of course, is right in the middle of this effort. And I think that thus far, and there will be other big victories, I'm sure, but thus far, I think the big sort of validation was last year's Nobel Peace Prize to ICAN, to International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. But the reason I mentioned humanitarian disarmament is because one of the features of humanitarian disarmament is that through this lens, one is not only concerned about negative obligations, which is the way that international law has historically been framed as around negative obligations, things you cannot do or things you shall not do. You will not possess nuclear weapons. You will not attack civilians. You will not attack protected infrastructure. You will not develop, killer robots, what have you. Those are your classic negative obligations, and that's the typical framework. But I think an innovative element of humanitarian disarmament efforts, be they nuclear, conventional, what have you, is the emphasis and the inclusion of positive obligations. So in addition to you shall not use nuclear weapons or you shall not use landmines, is if you have already used them, you shall remediate the effects of you shall address the effects that those have already had. So when it comes to the environment, this is very clear, and that states must take steps when they have used certain categories of weapons. They must take steps on environmental remediation. And in fact, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons itself has an article specifically on victim assistance and environmental remediation. So, just to mention one line, I mean, the state parties shall take necessary and appropriate measures towards the environmental remediation of contaminated areas. So again, I think this is a very welcome contribution of this humanitarian disarmament movement to broader disarmament efforts, but to the sense of what states are actually accountable for. And it's not just not using certain weapons, but again, addressing the impact, however old that impact may be, and some of the effects of nuclear weapons testing are decades old, but no less damaging, no less harmful for the ecosystem or for the communities that live around the test areas, such as Semipalatinsk in Kazakhstan and others. So again, that is very positive. The other big arms control treaty in recent years, in addition to the nuclear ban treaty, I would say is the Arms Trade Treaty, at least the other big treaty that I follow, or that we follow closely at Project Ploughshares. The Arms Trade Treaty, unfortunately, does not have provisions related to the environment. The provisions of the Arms Trade Treaty, welcome as they are, relate to situations in which military exports would contribute to undermining peace and security, contribute to facilitating violations of international humanitarian law and human rights law, offenses under conventions related to terrorism, but not the environment. So this is unfortunate, and by the same token, this is not to say that conventional arms exports do not have environmental impacts, just that they are not covered under the treaty. One framework that I would think of to bring closer the Arms Trade Treaty to environmental concerns might be the Sustainable Development Goals, which have this is, I'm sure you're familiar with them, but this refers to the post-2015 development agenda, and they were sort of adopted and announced with quite a bit of fanfare and noise, and it's a very positive thing, and they have specific targets. And in the context of the Arms Trade Treaty conferences of states parties and other related.
Can I stop you a sec? Because I've lost when you refer to the post 2015 agenda. Now
right.
We're talking about the Arms Trade Treaty. Is that
no, Metta, I'm sorry, I wasn't clear. The Arms Trade Treaty unfortunately has no provisions for environmental protection. All the provision, the Arms Trade Treaty, which regulates the arms trade, seeks to prevent misuse of weapons related to human rights violations or exacerbating armed conflict. However, the one possible linkage to the environmental discussion it might be through the Sustainable Development Goals, which are also known or comprise what is understood to be the post-2015 development agenda, because up until then, there were it was the Millennium Goals, and now it's the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, these goals, there is a linkage between the goals and the Arms Trade Treaty.
Okay, because that's fascinating. The linkage between the Arms Trade Treaty and the Sustainable Development Goals.
Indeed, and we have at last year's Conference of States Parties, which we attended, several civil society statements to the plenary emphasize this point that there is such a linkage between the ATT and the Sustainable Development Goals. Mostly related to goal number 16, but the Sustainable Development Goals
16 is peace. 16 is
institutions,
right?
And justice and all of and that's the one that's most closely related to the ATT. But the Sustainable Development Goals also make very explicit reference to environmental concerns above and below water, and the air, so I think that might be the sort of the bridge between such arms control agreements as the ATT, which have no direct provisions for the environment, and the goals that are specifically related to that.
Okay, now I think what we need to think about is in dealing with public opinion, how do we make that linkage? And one of the linkages is simply opportunity costs. That is, if money that you spend on weapons, you don't have to spend on sustainable development goals or any other good things that you need to do, certainly including the work to reduce global warming. And according to CIPRI, I think it's about $1.7 trillion a year that the world has been spending on weaponry. And if you took that 1.7, that's about what it would take to make the real transition to controlling global warming and handling a lot of these other sustainable development goals. So the simple equation that the Global Day of Action Against Military Spending, that movement, which is run largely by the International Peace Bureau, that campaign every year to make the linkage between the spending on the military and the needed spending that we're not getting to put into the environment and other social human needs, that kind of linkage should, at least in terms of the public discourse, should make it easier for us to change public opinion if, in fact, we can even get out there and affect that public opinion. I don't know. Do you agree? And then I want to hear what Joe has to think about it.
Yeah, I mean, just to wrap up, I guess my taking of the floor, but that I think it's a bit of a paradoxical situation that, of course, environmental damage is something we wish to avoid at all costs, and going forward, and the environmental damage that has occurred in the past is something that we regret. But in a sort of counterintuitive silver lining dimension, it has been quite effective to move policy debates about arms control. You know, the fear of environmental damage or the evidence of past environmental damage and graphic pictures, if you will, of a river that has run dry, or what have you. I don't even know what example to think about. Those things are effective, you know, as tools for civil society to draw attention about the broader perils of militarization.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Joanna, I'd like to hear your thoughts about that. In terms of public opinion and influencing political will to get disarmament, which we need for not only to protect ourselves from the ravages of warfare, but also to protect ourselves from the side effects of militarism on the environment and on climate change.
Right. I'll be happy to have a go at that. But I just want to put an addendum to what Cesar said, to just remind ourselves of the most horrifying environmental climate effect of weapons would be nuclear winter, incurred with the use of about 100 ordinary-sized nuclear bombs, which would last about 4 years and be severe, grave climate effects, possibly involving chilling as well as darkening and nuclear famine, and then likely followed by frying because of the increased carbon dioxide, because of all the conflagration that produces the black carbon that causes the nuclear winter. So while we just in the box where we're thinking of military impacts on climate, we need to have a space for thinking about nuclear winter and not to forget it.
In other words, the interesting way to cure global warming is to have a little nuclear winter. I don't think so.
Jack, sorry for some background noise here. I'll shut it off. Okay, actually, Metta, I think it would be followed by increased warming because of the incineration of a huge, the combustion of a huge amount of biomass and other stuff. Okay, so it's good that we're on to what to do, where to go with this. I think, as I was studying this stuff over the last day, I was thinking in terms of, okay, what am I going to do next about this? And my thoughts were to start with small steps, reminding people of this equation, that there are opportunity costs every time we spend $1 million on the military. We can't spend it on a response to impending effects of climate change, but also to start with a step of demanding to know what is the emissions profile of our national militaries. I should comment here that the exemption on accounting that's been mentioned so far and has been outrageous has gone. The Paris Accords do not include that exemption in their demands for international accounting of carbon emissions. So
I'm sorry, I missed something. The Paris Accords do not include what?
Exemption for nations leaving out the emissions of their militaries in overseas operations. They don't exempt it anymore.
That I understand is true, but I also think they don't tell nations what to do about it.
They don't
set quotas or anything and tell them how to fix it, but they do at least expect people to report it now, right? Nations.
Yeah. It seems the thoughts that I had about where to go with this from where I stand is to have kind of military watchdog people in all of the important climate organizations who just keep their eye on this issue and keep pushing this issue, demanding for our own national accounting to include military greenhouse gas emissions and to as they say, disaggregate, differentiate between the carbon gases, the dangerous refrigerant gases, etc. So we know what our military is doing, and a broader issue that I think climate organizations are beginning to push is awareness of the carbon budget, awareness that globally we can only emit, I think it's 729 billion more tons of carbon before we push ourselves into dangerous climate zone.
Mm-hmm.
And asking our governments to consciously work within carbon budgets, and then having a citizen commentary on how much of that carbon budget belongs to the military, how much carbon or how much greenhouse gases are we prepared to let our militaries emit. So we need proper accounting. We need to apply carbon budget thinking to this, and to demand that our departments of defense account for contributing proportionately to national greenhouse gas targets. So in Canada, what is it? It's 40% below 2005 levels by 2030, is it? In New Zealand, it's net zero carbon by 2050. That departments of defense need to have a phase-out plan to achieve their proportionate contribution to national targets. Now, is this demilitarization? Well, it's an indirect way of getting at demilitarization.
I think Gar has something to intercede here. A comment of some kind. He's been waving his hand like he needs to talk. Let's let Gar say what's on his mind.
Excellent.
Thank you. On the issue of solutions, I don't know any American who voted for the F-35. I don't know any American who voted for $1 trillion to be spent on modernizing the nuclear arsenal. If we're going to stop war, we got to realize why we have war. War is profitable. General Smedley Butler said it a long time ago as a Marine hero, most decorated Marine in history. He said it. War is a scam. War is a lie. The way you stop war is by taking the profit out of war. And the elephants that we are not discussing have names like Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, BAE. As long as there's profit to be made by war, climate change is actually a good thing if you think about it, because as the planet warms, as the crops die, as the water vanishes, people get anxious. You have refugees. You have additional tensions. You have people fearing the other. You have people who are starving. That's one of the elements that played into the problem that Syria is in. They suffered a major drought. People fled to the cities. The infrastructure could not support them. The issue of our government not being controlled by the people. We have an oligarchic system today, and our political system could best be described, I think, as a corporate militocracy, which exists to fund these powerful corporations. You think the National Rifle Association is powerful? The Pentagon lobby is the NRA on steroids. They profit from fear. They profit from death. They profit from disruption. They profit from fear. These people have to be addressed. I don't know how we do it. Massive tax resistance. I don't know what the solutions are, but there will never be a solution to war on this planet until we take the profit out of the hands of these corporate killers.
Wow. All right, I get it. And I think we've made the really important point that it seems to me that we're all saying that the reduction of military is really key, not only as a way of protecting real human security, well-being, from violence and from war, but also as a way of reducing all of the threats of global warming, and as a way of creating opportunities again for spending money that would otherwise be spent on weapons. So we need to get rid of militarism. We need to we have to have a great reduction in the military establishments in the world. Maybe I would say we ought to cut it by 80%, that every army should be reduced that much at least. Shift the money to other things and protect ourselves from the kinds of environmental and climate change effects that we're all worried about. Well, now what this means to me, and I'm going to be winding us up because we're about coming to an end of our time, but it's what we've been seeing is that you can't just do one thing and expect it to solve everything, because what Gar has just been pointing out, we have to change a lot in the political system to create a greater democracy if we're going to create these other changes, because as he says, we didn't vote to increase the size of the army and the military. The people did not make that choice. It's other major interests that have dominated that. So we have to do a number of things, political and economic changes, a number of things all at once, or any one of them alone won't work because they're all interdependent. With that in mind, I want to point out how this particular program is related to another project that's ongoing. We have already been working on a project called How to Save the World in a Hurry. And on the 30th and 31st of May, there will be a conference here in Toronto for everybody who can be, especially the series that we've been running and will be running. These discussions will all be related to various changes that need to be made to save the world from a variety of different dangers that are all interdependent and all linked. Just as today we've seen the linkage between the military and climate change and economic, the world's economy and the political system, we can also see a variety of other changes having to do with pandemics and famines and cybersecurity and a variety of other threats to humankind. These are all interdependent and all linked. So we need to address all of them simultaneously, because what it takes to reduce one threat is often exactly the same thing that it takes to reduce the others, just as we've been talking about money is a factor for all of them. So on the 30th and 31st of May, we'll have a conference here, and I hope you will check the website and be familiar with what we're planning and buy a ticket, because it's $100 for 2 days, unless you're a student or unwaged, in which case it's only $40. And we'll be having excellent people making contributions about how to solve these problems. The whole point of the exercise is to come up with a list of 25 public policy proposals that, if they were adopted, would actually significantly affect the risk and reduce the threat of not only war and weapons, but also climate change, famine, pandemics, massive radiation exposure from things like a reactor explosion or something of that kind, and cyber attacks. All of these have to be looked at as a package, and we'll be looking at the proposals that would reduce them all. So the outcome of this conference will be one sheet of paper with 25 different proposals that we have picked together democratically. Everybody's allowed to come, everybody's given a voice in choosing. And we'll come up with a list of 25 proposals that will really together make a difference in reducing the threat of all 6 of these catastrophic threats to humankind. Therefore, I want to invite you all to come. And in the meantime, have a look at the website for it. It's called tosavetheworld.ca. And there you'll see the program and other things that you need to know in order to participate in this. Next week, come back. Every Monday night now, I'm going to be having these discussions by Zoom and by Facebook about elements of all of these threats to humankind. And next week will be exactly on the topic that Cesar raised already tonight, and that is the new treaty for the prohibition of nuclear weapons. By the way, so far it's been adopted by 122 countries, but only 5 countries have ratified it so far. So it just gives us a signal that we have our work cut out for us to get public opinion aware of the threat that we face just from nuclear weapons. Okay, any other final comments in 1 second from each of you? Or any of you, if you have something more to say?
Well, I guess Gar has something to show.
What is that, Gar?
I just wanted to publicly agree with Gar's earlier comment about the profit, at the center of militarism. I think it goes without saying that that's a key or the key driver of many of these arms deals, or whatever the consequences, environmental or otherwise. And in the case of right now, I think there is no more egregious example of profit coming in the way of any other consideration, including human rights, than arms exports to Saudi Arabia by Canada, by the US, by the UK, by France, when the risks are so apparent. But that just goes to underscore the huge impact of the business side of all of this.
Thank you. You're right. What was that thing you were holding up, Gar? You were trying to show us a sign of some kind, but I don't know what is it? I can't make it out. What is
Gar's
it?
muted. Gar is muted.
Huh?
Gar is muted.
Thank you. Yeah, this is a chart that shows the world's major arms manufacturers and suppliers.
Oh.
The yellow line indicates how many of them are American corporations. This is the problem.
Mm-hmm. Indeed it is. Certainly we've got to get the profit out of the thing. No question about that. And I'm glad, thank you for bringing that up, because it's something I hadn't even, brought up myself. You've all contributed a lot to our thinking, and I hope that we will all stay in touch, and you'll check in with us next week when we have another conversation, this one about nuclear weapons. Thank you all. It's been lovely. Good night.
Thanks. Good night.
Okay, good night. Thank you.
Thank you, Metta.
Yeah, thank you,
Bye.
Metta. Thank you.
Now, end meeting. How do I do this? I have to click end meeting. How do I do it? Supposed to.
Hi, Metta. I think I'm the last one, but I'm just gonna close the window. I don't see any end meeting button, I guess. Oh, there is a leave meeting.
Yeah, we're supposed to have the end meeting button on mine, but I'm having trouble.
Oh, because you're the host. Yeah. Because I do see a leave meeting thing. Otherwise, just close the window and see what happens.
No, I don't want to turn everything off, because it might not.
Go wrong again, ever.
Might not do what it's supposed to do.
Okay. I'm signing out, Metta.
Well,
bye.
You guys have done your part. Now all I have to do is figure out how to turn the whole thing off. Let's see. Maybe it's on here. No, I can't figure out how to end the meeting. I wonder how many thousands of people are watching this and wondering how they're going to end the meeting. I don't know. I don't know. I can't figure. Let's see, meeting. Let's see if it up here, if I can end it. This is funny. Come on. And see up there if I could get that to happen. Come on. End meeting, please. you guys still with me? Have you gone home? Could it be? It's not the Zoom thing. And but if you turn it off, it's not, it's got to do something when, after we're through. I don't want to shut it down until we've done it right, you know? I know, I can't get the... There's no more button. Oh, here, maybe there.
No, not that. It should be shown there.
Well, it's not there, so I can't click something that's not there.
Yes.
Here's another more button. Let me try that. Oh.
It should be on here.
I know it should be there. It's not there. I don't want to shut it down because it's supposed to do something afterward. Yeah.
Help us. I don't know how to close it because. Wait a minute.
Hi, here I am.
Okay.
There is no more button. No, that's the problem. It's not showing a more button, or rather, it shows two more buttons over at the side in this white column, but it doesn't. But neither one of them. If you click on either one of them, it doesn't work. There is no more button at the bottom. There's all of those little things that used to be at the bottom, running across the bottom. They're not there. Yeah, all I've got is a pinwheel. A pinwheel. Well, what's happening now? If you are watching it, is it still on? You can hear me on screen? Well, if I shut it off, I mean, isn't there something it's supposed to do afterward, like to finish its? Well, then how is? I mean, I don't want to lose the recording by shutting it down before. It says recording now. What if I click the recording button? Because it doesn't need to record now, right? But on the other hand, I can't. All I get is a pinwheel. Right, I can't click off the recording because I get the pinwheel. Wherever I go, I'm getting this pinwheel. No, not. I mean, there's Firefox still open because of the connection to. Oh, wait a minute. Here it says confirm close. You're about to close two tabs. Well, do I want to click yes? Close tabs on. That's the Peace Magazine something, I guess. I don't know what the tabs are. Peace Magazine and the Firefox. I don't know what it's closed tabs, but I've clicked on it and it's not doing anything. I mean, I can, suppose I close, no, I can't even close Firefox because of pinwheel. Yeah. Oh, not normal. Okay. Oh, and you want me to leave the room? Why does that help? Okay. All right. We're going to go out of the room because it's recording my voice. So, and he's going to try to log in as me on a different browser and see if he can intervene and stop the thing.
Yeah. I don't know what this is just demo because we need to show our
Yeah.
our option.
Right. I can't do anything except just wait and see if he can do it. See, the thing is, I don't want to shut it down. Even if I manage, I can turn off the computer. Just turn it off. What would that do? It would have saved it. I don't know what it would have done because I can't.
Have you offered this?
No. No. You know, I haven't done this kind of thing. This is the first time.
This is the first time.
Yeah.
Of course, I don't know. But you
I have done Zoom. And I've done Facebook.
yes.
And I've done Facebook Live.
Yes.
But I've never had Zoom that feeds into Facebook.
Really? So this is your first time to use it? Oh, really? Yeah, because maybe I want to try again.
Not until he's finished. I have a feeling that if we shut this down before it has been shut down completely, and they lose the whole video.
I'm not sure.
That's why he's trying to intervene and stop it. Because I could just turn off the computer. That would stop it. I don't want to do that because I'm afraid I'm going to cause problems. He'll call me back. When we decide what to do.
And the life, I mean the process, when you write,
That's all right.
yeah.
Well, you notice it didn't happen at the beginning, but as we got longer and longer into it, the faces were all breaking up.
Yes.
And I wasn't sure whether it was doing that on whether it was doing that on the real thing or just on my computer. Now, when you were looking at it on your phone, did it look all right, or did the faces all breaking up?
No, break up. For everything, right? The video. Yeah. So I mean, action.
people agree to